This is one of my favorite articles of all time from Foreign Affairs 1955, titled The Egyptian Revolution. And who's the author? None other than Gamal Abdel Nasser. This is a favorite because it's essentially one of Egypt's historic leaders criticizing another one of its historic leaders. Nasser had a lot to say about his predecessor from over 100 years, Muhammad Ali. Well, why? This is episode 3 of Egypt's modern history. Last episode, we talked about Muhammad Ali. He built a massive empire, and he built schools, industrialized the cotton industry, modernized the military, and essentially brought the country into the modern era. So if you didn't see the last episode, you'll find it in a playlist in the description. So what's not to like? In Nasser's eyes, there was a lot to dislike. In summary, I think this paragraph says it all. In detail, Nasser basically said that the man who built this massive empire laid the groundwork for British colonization. Well, according to Nasser's version of history, Ali set up a feudal system where the state, which was himself, owned all the land and treated the farmers poorly. More than that, even though he made a lot of money, the only people to benefit were himself, his family, and his friends, many of whom were foreigners, and many of whom owned land and received tax exemptions. The result was massive inequality, a very rich class and a very poor class. Okay, but what about the money Muhammad Ali made? Nasser said that the money he made was spent on foreign wars, quote, serving Muhammad Ali's own ambition. Nasser's basically saying that Muhammad Ali took all the political and economic power for himself, established an aristocratic regime, and worked too closely with foreigners, paving the way for British occupation and colonization. Okay, so that's a nice story, but how true is it? Well, first of all, there's two sides to Muhammad Ali. There's Muhammad Ali himself, his own rule, which lasted about 40 years. Then there are his sons, his dynasty, who were the kings of Egypt and Sudan up until the 1950s. The last of Ali's descendants was King Farouk, who Nasser overthrew in 1952. So one thing you should know is that Muhammad Ali's government was very different from the way his sons governed. But the two are connected. How are they connected? They're connected by the system Ali set up. That sort of aristocratic regime that Nasser was complaining about, wherein the monarchy had all the power and everyone else kinda had to deal with it. When we evaluate that system, a good amount of Nasser's complaints are reasonable. In Galal Amin's The Egyptian Economy, he points out that Ali did indeed monopolize the land, that he spent a lot of money on the military, and that his rule saw the influx of foreigners moving to Egypt. There's a catch though. See, the system Muhammad Ali set up wasn't that simple. Sure, the monarchy had a lot of power and inequality was an issue, but Muhammad Ali made a lot of steps in the right direction. For example, Egyptian historian Abdul Rahman al-Rifaa, in his book, The Era of Muhammad Ali, talks about the Egyptians that went to France to learn medicine, technology, and science, and came back to spread their newfound knowledge in Egypt. It wasn't even necessarily non-religious people who did this. Even Islamic scholars and imams like Rifaa al-Tahtawi went to France and came back impressed by some aspects of French culture. Rifaa al-Tahtawi even made a book about his experience called An Imam in Paris. He thought that European advancements in science, technology were so important that he translated thousands of European, especially French, works into the Arabic language. And that's exactly why Muhammad Ali mattered. He gave Egypt the mindset of modernization, especially on the cultural and social side. Ali's style of rule laid the foundation for Egypt to become a center for Arabic literature, movies, music, culture, political ideas, and even religious thinking. After all, that was the environment that Nasser was born and grew up in, and it was where he was exposed to a lot of political ideas, many of which, like socialism and industrialization, and the style with which he pursued industrialization, originated in Europe. Now you can say that because he followed European culture, that fed into a larger narrative of colonization, but that discussion requires another conversation that this video doesn't have time for. Returning to Nasser's article though, he makes a very solid argument against Muhammad Ali. What was that argument? Well, first of all, I need to say that Muhammad Ali gave Egypt the mindset of modernization and industrialization, and the country became a cultural center heavily inspired by Europe, as I said. But the thing is, how many people really enjoyed that advancement? See, Nasser made a very important point. According to Nasser, Muhammad Ali set up a system in which the state owned all the land, and the farmers, who were a high portion of the population, didn't really own that much. As a result, economic advancement was a bit difficult. Rifaa's book shows some evidence of this. He says that although commerce grew in Ali's era, the benefits went mainly to the government and the French intermediaries who were doing international trade. And in another book by Gamal Amin, he mentioned that before 1952, there were iron lines between each economic class that were very difficult to overcome. That inequality may stem back to the system Ali set up, the system where the state owned everything and the farmers weren't exactly treated the best. That doesn't mean, however, that monopolization of the land was all bad, at least in the beginning. Gamal Amin mentions in his book, The Egyptian Economy, that Muhammad Ali refused to take on loans and relied more on revenues from the cotton industry to finance his projects. Monopolization even helped him negotiate higher prices with foreign buyers. See, that is very different from what his sons did. Muhammad Ali's sons took on a lot of debt. I think the titles of Amin's chapters best exemplify this. Said Pasha, Debt Without Development. Ismail Pasha, Borrowing in an Era of Prosperity. And case in point is the Suez Canal. The canal company, at first, was 50% French and about 40% Egyptian owned. But later on, Ismail Pasha, one of Muhammad Ali's sons who later ruled Egypt, had to sell his country's stake in the canal company. Why? Well, because he was in debt. It was this type of borrowing that eventually led to the British occupation, which lasted decades and heavily influenced the way Nasser saw the world and didn't really end until he came around. Overall though, despite the inequality, the economic issues, the aristocracy, Muhammad Ali's rule overall brought the country many things that it needed, or at the very least, many things that helped it in the long run. As I said, Ali's rule awakened the country's political consciousness and put it on the world map. It became more than simply an Ottoman province. It was a center of Arabic literature, political ideas, and even certain types of Islamic thinking. Projects like the Suez Canal were built, and Alexandria and Cairo entered an era of beauty, even if it came under serious debt. Even if there was inequality, it was this inequality that would bring about a man like Gamal Abdel Nasser. It was this environment where interaction and influence from Europe was very, very, very high, and we'll find out how the Europeans, or more specifically the British, colonized Egypt in the next episode. Until then, thank you for watching.